schools that don't have window, and they needed to populate the, and they needed to populate the secondary school. So they shipped all of us. So I was just 8, almost 9, and I found myself in secondary school. So for me, secondary school was a blur. And of course, going to that, I started in that school. It was called Mushin Community High School in Okota. They're still there. And in that school, there are many Ikeja Grammar Schools, so many of these schools in that place, So I just started. And of course, by the next year, I found myself in, my family decided to move to Ondo State, and I found myself in Army Comprehensive High School. I was basically 9. I was now in the same class as my brother, my elder brother, and all of that. But for me, it was just a joke. I was just playing around and so on. So I did my first WAEC. I was 13 years old when I did my first WAEC. So I had to redo the WAEC. So just managed to make the 6 credits and, move on, But basically, that was how it played out. So by the time I did the JAMB. I think I did JAMB only once, scored 229 or so. And I wanted to go to Unilag was this psychology? They took me for psychology, but Ondo State University then, which is now Ekiti State University, took me for economics. And my combination was odd because in the secondary schools I went, they were very new secondary schools. Army Comprehensive was a very good secondary school in the military days. It's still there. But we didn't have anything like, student counselors who could help us choose. So I knew I used to be a fine artist. So, of course, I had fine arts. I loved biology, so I did biology. Agric was important. But because I didn't see myself as one of the top students then, unlike my senior brother who was a bit more matured and, of course, older, I ended up in what they call commerce class. So I was taking accounting and commerce and economics and so on with biology and agri, no chemistry, no physics. So it was only on those State University that could take me with that combo. But by the time I entered, I was now 16 years. I was barely 16 years in year 1. In fact, it was when I was registering at 16 because admission is in September, and I'm a September child, 11. And it was when I turned 16. But by then, I used to think a lot. I just realized I used to really think a lot. Think about the universe, think about things. Of course, my dad also was a sort of intellectual in his own right. And in our room, when he built his house in Akure, and it was in our room downstairs that he stored most of his books. And then he used to have a lot of Reader's Digest. And me and my brother would pour through Reader's Digest, read all those stories. And so somehow our minds were developing. And of course, later on, we became addicted to novels, James Hadley Chase, Harold Robbins, Nick Carter. We grew up in that. In fact, a lot of my friends, they call me Chase because I used to have 3 or 4 of those novels with me every time. I read almost everything. So it was then that my mind grew up. Now, and of course, by the time we did our first semester exam in year 1, of course, I was still a bit unserious. I'm not that kind of. And a lot of people had checked their results and said, oh, we adopted the UI grading system, which went up to 7 because our first VC in that university, Professor Ladapo, late now, he was from UI. So, and a lot of people will go check their results. Oh, I made 3 point something. This one said I made 2 point something. This one. They said, go and check your results. Where? I didn't know where they checked. I went there and I had about 5 point something. And they were like, this your results will be one of perhaps the best in the class. And of course, it was the best in the class. Wasn't the best in the faculty. And this is the story of life. So we had people who made 6 points, maybe first class level, right from the beginning, but then they dropped off. There's a certain gentleman, I won't mention his name, fantastic guy. But what dragged him back, I suppose, was he had a lot of religious affiliation and all the fellowships and so on. And I saw my friend, he was in banking and finance. He dropped, managed to make a 2-1, but I mean, I was somehow consistent. And of course, the truth when I was in university, and many times I would be late to uni, looking for the small money that the state university wanted. But I would copy my notes by hand. Okay, my internet is unstable, but I think it will soon be stable. So
Okay.
I'll copy notes. I'll copy notes by hand, and I still emerged the best student in the class, and ended up being the best overall in the class in the faculty at the university in the year for the year 1991. The graduates in those days. But you see, like I said, it's an ongoing thing. So I know people who made great first class out of university who are nothing, who are struggling even on the
Yeah.
academic side, even on the financial side. And I know people who made third class who are doing fantastically today. Some of them have gone on, even in academics, to acquire more degrees. They have PhDs, they're doing well. Some of them are doing incredibly well in the financial space. I know some of them who are bank MDs, bank EDs today, who are my
Mm.
contemporaries, you know.
Yeah.
So I think the whole idea is never give up, keep expanding your mind. In fact, these days that we have internet, uh, learning is almost free. It depends on what
Yeah.
you spend your time doing, you know.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a
I,
lifelong lesson.
I agree with you because the other side of it also is that you've seen some people who are in primary school always top of the class, even in the universities, they make first class, make top of the class. When then they come into the university of the world, sometimes something happens. Even their brilliance or
Exactly.
what other things will change. So it's a continuous learning, as you mentioned. Another example we use is Obasanjo, who is at the age of 81, got a PhD. You know, so it's. I'm also very happy to know that you belong to the Chase, James Ali Chase generation. Just let
Oh
me,
yes.
as
That's
an aside, let me tell you that I was also an addict. In fact, I read
oh, wow.
political science. I read political science partly because of, not partly, almost because of the novels of James Harley Chase. The novel was
Wow.
called A Lotus from Iskwon. Maybe you know about it,
It's cool.
which
Yeah.
was
Yeah, I know about it.
which was set in Vietnam, and the story
Hmm.
was about Steve Jeff, who just you know came to Saigon, to an American looking for big
Wow.
money in Saigon,
Hmm.
and as he was
Hmm.
trying to hit the wall, it turned out to be a false wall, and it collapsed, and you see gems on the
Wow.
floor. And then the
Hmm.
servant was running around saying he must return it because he belonged to General Mbaganto or something like that, and that the state will
Hmm.
give him honor. So the American was
Hmm.
thinking, what a crazy thing. He has spent all his life looking for big bucks, and this
Hmm.
Vietnamese man will not allow him. The man insisted that he must. So he said, suddenly he remembered that the man was a supporter of the regime, and that three
Hmm.
times a week he goes to study political science. So in my
Hmm.
mind, I linked this man's incorruptibility and patriotism to the
Hmm.
fact that he was studying political science. I was meant to study law as a first degree. I just went and
Hmm.
changed my law and put political science. Just that sound as so that's how James
Fantastic.
Stanley changed the role of James Stanley Chase in, and even to write novels in our own days. But that's
Yes.
thank you very much. Let me also, before bringing the other arm of your sort of personal one, before we move on, you started, or rather, you were the presidential candidate and chairman of Abundant Nigeria Renewal Party. One, what has become of that party? Two, have you found a home in the APC, or are you just beating a retreat? Because the way the FASWA of 2019 was sounding, in fact, one of the interviews I read, I remember they asked you, said you had, why do you want to present? There was a sense of urgency and all that kind of thing. So where is the kind of ideological compatibility between you and the APC? Is it that now I found a home, or are you beating a retreat? Why
Well,
APC? And where's the
eh,
position of your party?
oh well, okay. So I think it's a long journey and a long story, but I'll make it short. So
Mm,
am I beating a retreat? I can't tell. Let me start it this way.
mhm,
Um, let me start it this way. The party ANRP, perhaps I would have still been in that milieu if if they hadn't abrogated the party. So we started that part. We started trying to register that party in December 16 or December 17, 2016. And at that time, I was very much disenchanted with the Buhari administration. Nigeria had gone into what I termed an unnecessary recession, economic recession in 2016. And I felt from my own analysis that the government of General Buhari was, rather lazy and not proactive, in taking the right decision to avoid that recession. That was in 2016. Even though I must say I felt a bit more, conciliatory and a bit more, I pitied them a little bit more when the second recession of 2020 happened, because that was a global recession precipitated by COVID-19. But the first one I felt was unacceptable. I was a big Buhari supporter before then, and partly also because I went to an army secondary school. We used to have Buhari come to our school in those days. Buhari, Abacha, we used to see them. They would come. We would break in school. They will go to the parade ground. So I grew up in that military era, But to a large extent, so by we started in 2016, and I was glad that I went to register that party. And this is a lesson for those who are, trying to jump in from party to party these days. It's incredibly, one of the most difficult thing to do in registering a party today is to get a logo. They suffered us on that logo matter. In fact, I remember, and the kind of people that are in charge of just checking those things, these are clerks in INEC, mere clerks. If they say your logo is not going forward, it's not. So what they do is this: they check acronym. Of course, they check party name to be sure that you are not using somebody else's name who had been there, because of course they will be sued. Even if a party is abrogated and cancelled, that name still exists. Nobody can go and carry. Nobody can carry National Party of Nigeria (NPN) today. Nobody can carry GNPP, Great Nigeria People's Party, except you can show that you were part of the founders way back, and go through other legal hoop. The second thing is the acronym. So nobody can register UPN today, because you say in 1979 there was a UPN. Nobody can register AG. Nobody can register Deus Opuga, except you can show. Then the next thing is your logo. So they suffered us on that logo. We had some idea about a small tree plant and, something to show our youth and prospects for the future. They kept rejecting. We tried, different things, brought the map of Africa, superimposed it, brought the map of Nigeria. No, it won't fly until we shows a laptop. So they say, okay, this laptop is our logo, but what does it mean? They will ask you. So, well, we just want to show that we're a young party, we're a tech party, and we were very big on registering our people via the internet in those days to grow our numbers, And that was when they managed to approve. That was how we got approved exactly 1 year after we started in December 16, 2017. But then we started organizing. We were very naive, and we put in the little bit that we had. Even though I had issues, we had issues like every party. If you would put people together, you'd expect to have issues. People who think in different ways, who will disagree with you, people who want to supplant you, even people like Shore, who are supposed to be strong, on the streets. Some guy came and displaced him from his party at some point. In my own party, they also tried to do that, but I think I was a little bit too strong for them, and the way I'd arranged it with a lot of transparency, it wasn't possible for them. Anyway, so we contested for many things, but as we were contesting and spending money, we were getting a little bit more and more disillusioned about our prospects in terms of, can we really win anything? However, we were hoping that we would be able to contest for many local government positions, especially councilorships and so on. But our party was removed and abrogated by INEC in February 2020, alongside other parties, maybe 50-something parties, for no reason, because there was an electoral amendment under President Buhari, where they said that, okay, a party will remain a party, number one, if you can score 25% in presidential, or score 25% in a state election, or score 25% in local government or Senate or whatever, House of Reps, or if you can win at least one councillorship. That was the criteria. However, by the time we were removed in 2020, about 32 states had not conducted any local government election. So that election, which is what we were looking out for, hadn't happened. But they did it, and everybody supported. And even some of the youth who hadn't joined the parties at that point felt that, what the hell, who the hell are you people? I beg, go and sit down in one place. So we licked our wound and everybody went home. But what INEC did was clearly not right as per the law, as per the same law, because what it means is that if that law, and that law still exists, what it means is that the INEC alone cannot abrogate any party, except they have to check with every of the state electoral commission to see whether they had conducted the local government election and all the councilorships and get a go ahead that that party had not won any thing at that level, and then they can go. And you cannot assume. As a matter of fact, when we were removed, 4 states had not had their election. So those off-cycle states, I remember Anambra, Ondo, perhaps Kogi, and one more, hadn't done their election. And so how can you don't know whether any of those parties could have won anything in those states. So anyhow, they did what they did because they were powerful, and so people have to take notes. Anyway, so why am I here? Well, I've always, I've always, kind of regarded President Tinubu very much in the political space, just like many millions of people around the country. And so I've always had regards for him. I'm not one of those who really criticized and all of that, taking him to the cleaners and so on. No, I'm not. But I was watching what the Lagos experiment was turning out to be. And when I looked at the 3 people who were running for election in 2023, I realized that, look, this is the person I will align with. Of course, our party license had been taken away in 2020, and 2023 was 3 years down the line. So, but for now, I'm not in the political space. I think it's too expensive to be in the political space. I think you need not only in terms of money, even in terms of your time, even in terms of your psychology. I think it's too tasking. Because when you think about it, you can buy the whole world for your voters and buy this whatever. But by the time I've seen people who have done a lot for people, still get criticized in some of the most acerbic manners. So you wonder what it is that people want. Nigerians, we say we want the best country, we want to be like abroad, but how many of us can actually really survive in the kind of atmosphere they have survived and stick to the rules and pay all the taxes and know how to remain in your own lane? Nigerians are very vocal people, even within Africa. We're very vocal people, and we sometimes we get very deluded about what we have. I think it's called exceptionalism. So we have this exceptionalism about how special we are, not only as Nigerians, even as the tribe that we come from, even as our religion and all of that. And I think it's too much. I'm someone who I think I thrive better when I'm just in my space, reading my books or listening to something or developing my mind and writing. So you probably will see that even in this space right now, I'm perhaps one of the few government people who I still many times I publish my thoughts in places like Premium Times, the cable. I get on TV, I do an interview. I love an intellectual challenge, and that's part of why when you called me to this event, I said, okay, why not? Professor Adibe is one of the few intellectuals that we respect in the space.
Okay, thank you very much. I just want to follow up this question. Because when you are running, before we talk about President Tinubu's economic policies, when you were running, I didn't get the impression that you were a fan of what we call the Washington Consensus. I may be wrong, but you and some of those very young people we felt wanted to make a point, not necessarily that they were running to win. So we felt they were there in the part autonomies because they wanted to put certain issues on the national agenda. And in my mind, it's not something that one could easily, connect to is neoliberal economics. Let me say something before I continue that. I remember it was Alan Greenspan. I think he was from 2006 to 2018, chairman of the U.S. Federal Reserve Bank. So he was asked the secret of his success. He said one of the secrets is that he always did the opposite of whatever he was advised by the IMF. That was what of his reported. So in that light, and he was really regarded as a very successful chairman of the Federal Reserve Bank. In that sense, how will you then assess President Tinubu's economic policies? I'm talking about removing subsidies and floating the exchange rate. I want to know how exactly these policies are different from what Babangida did. And let me even put up front my own bias. I am a critic of neoliberal economics. I don't believe in that brand of economics. I'm not like saying it has to be Marxist, everything will be state, but maybe because I lived a long time in Scandinavian countries where you have a different form of what you can call humanistic economics. So where you have still, even in capitalist society, for example, to give an example, European agricultural policy, there's what they call agricultural guarantee fund. On average, it subsidizes the agriculture sector by 291.1 billion euros. If you go to the US, the agricultural sector is subsidized by about 16.35. If you turn again to energy sector, you see, for example, Europe spends over 150 billion to 200 billion subsidizing energy sector. In the US, the federal government provides an estimated 34 billion annually in subsidies to the only the fossil industry. In fact, the IMF estimated that the total subsidies to the energy sector in the US is about 750 billion. So I am asking, even from the time we are doing a critique, incidentally, I did my PhD on my dissertation on the IMF and policies. I always challenge to see which country can they give us as an example of a country that has adopted these forms of economic policy and they have succeeded. I am aware that despite the quantum of money the Bretton Woods institutions pumped into Ghana just to make one success story of his brand of economics, which we are now using, it still didn't work. So how when people are talking and praising the reforms of the government, well, they did it to all the other government. They did it to Babangida. They did it to other people and then they would change. Remember, there was in the IMF World Bank, there was what we call cross conditionalities. At a point, if you are not using the IMF in premature, you can't even reschedule your debts. And when everything failed, remember that mantra at that time was rolling back the state. And when it failed, they now said, oh, they were not implementing them well. It's now institutions. Now they came along with another mantra, bringing back the state. How are we going to be sure that in terms of human misery, 135 million Nigerians are living under the poverty line? And they say, okay, in the long run, it will be good. But as an economist, the economists who told us that in the long run, we're all dead. How do we judge these economic policies that, in my own opinion, which I am biased because I say I'm a critic of the neoliberal economic brand of economics. What will you make of it in terms of hope to Nigerians, in terms of, getting Nigerians moving forward?
Okay, thank you very much, Prof. I think I would also align with you. I'm also a critic of the neoliberalism and the dogmatism that comes with it. And I think that, all over the world now, we're seeing more and more evidence to show that neoliberal economics doesn't explain everything the way its proponents would rather have us believe, okay? It doesn't explain a lot of things, and it's a little bit, if you like, dismissive of Africa and the prospects of African economies. That's the truth. And so I don't believe in neoliberalism. As a matter of fact, whoever remains at that level of thinking in economics is not an economist, because economics, just like science, keeps innovating. And, a lot of new ideas have come on board. There's all sorts of new branches of economics right now that people have to get in touch with. In the last few years, even the kind of people who earned Nobel Prizes in economics were not neoliberalists. They were people who were thinking differently, people like behavioral economists and all of that. So yes, but the World Bank and IMF are powerful, are very powerful. In fact, one of the most critical things I've ever said was by someone who also was their friend, plus or minus, or President Obasanjo made a statement which is somewhere on WhatsApp, to the extent that when he was president, they would bring their reports, and there was a certain woman, Mrs. Kruger, who, when she was coming to Nigeria, you had to give her a presidential welcome. And they would do their Article 4, and by the time they were leaving, he would get the statement, their statement, and give to Okonjo-Iweala and also give to Soludo. And, that, of course, Mrs. Okonjo-Iweala will say, yes, 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 yes. But Soludo will say, no, 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 no. But he would reconcile the two and come up with a position the next day. I mean, that's from a president. And he said he told Soludo that, look, you can't ignore these people, but if you do, and he translated the Yoruba adage, he said, they will rub your nose on the ground. For those who are Yoruba, they would explain that to you. And I felt that was really powerful, really, really powerful. So to the extent that, listen, when you start to talk about World Bank and IMF, you're actually poking that whole geopolitical brouhaha, if I will use that word, kerfuffle, which we actually don't want to get involved in because we have an economy to run. So they are what they are. But I think that, unfortunately, even the number you picked, 135 million poor, including, I just saw a number yesterday, which I forwarded to two of my friends, quote unquote, in World Bank, that another 79% of people in Nigeria were facing poverty. So I said, well, okay, let me just call it 100%, because I think that whatever it is they use to get those numbers, they just plug in a certain robots, and the thing just tells them, because they don't have, this is Nigeria we're in now, they don't have enough staff or whatever to go around the whole of Nigeria and know what's happening. How can you say poverty is increasing consistently every time? That's why the fact that the government has pushed quite a bit of money to state level, and we're struggling to empower the local government. Some local governments are getting 1.5 billion naira every month. And even by the whole IMF World Bank report itself, and in fact, the last IMF Article 4 report was very positive on Nigeria. It was the same report that said that the naira should be trading at 1,147, and that the naira was undervalued as it is. The World Bank in April report and May report did say that the state governments were spending a lot more on capital compared to the federal government, which says that the policies of President Tinubu in empowering local government is a positive. And I think that, yes, what President Tinubu has done with his reform is to fundamentally kind of restructure the economy, which is good, okay? And of course, there'll be some initial pain. I think that the worst of the pain has been borne in 2023 and 2024 when inflation went up to 34%. I think that, in fact, we could have begun to see single-digit inflation by now, begin to cite it if the Iran-US war hadn't happened. And we're praying that they sort themselves out, because they were almost sorting out, and then the US started bombing again. I really don't understand what's going on that level, but I'm just concerned about the human crisis, the humanitarian crisis that the Iranians may be facing, and of course how it affects our economy. So I'm not a neoliberalist. As an economist, I'm agnostic to any of those isms, as it were. The only thing I can subscribe to, which we subscribe to in ANRP as a young party, is pragmatism. Pragmatism to the extent that we should think about our country and what works for our country only at every point in time. And also that we could only choose what is best out of capitalism and what is best out of the other isms, socialism, whatever. Whatever is working for them, we can adopt. For example, entrepreneurship is an okay thing. Almost all of us are entrepreneurs in Nigeria. It's good to set something up to try and increase your cost, to build something. It is capitalists that build almost all the buildings around us today. If those people weren't there, where would we be? It is capitalists like Dangote, they get into all these big ventures that some of us would, we don't want to lose our sleep. But so if they don't do that, where will we be? But in spite of that, you are also very, 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 very correct in mentioning the subsidies that United States and all this, even Europe, has given many of the critical sectors, including agriculture, including what they give by way of social investment and social services to their people.
Indirect subsidies, yeah.
Yes, even direct subsidies, monies that they give people who are on the dole in UK. It's a subsidy for not working. Though the only thing is that, and this is where I diverge. Where I diverge is that I don't think the Nigerian economy is at that point yet. Okay, where would just say, because look at South Africa. Part of the problem they have in South Africa is that, of course, the economy was built by the white people in South Africa. And South Africa is perhaps the only country in Africa where, a certain amount of money gets given to every old people, gets given to children, whether you were black or white. And perhaps that could have fed that scenario where the black people went and relaxed on the oars, thinking that just criticizing the white economy was going to get them out of the wood. Just criticize and they make some way for you and create a Patrick Mosepe or a Cyril Ramaphosa to become billionaires, and then everybody will become billionaires. I've heard some of the statements made by some of those people who are rioting to say, right now, if we divide all the money in South Africa, all of us will get 1 million rand. It tells you that you have a problem. You're not thinking. But Nigerians, we don't have any of such. And so you see Nigerians pushing out to everywhere in the world, trying to make one or two for themselves and almost rather unstoppable. Of course, we still have our own problems, but that's what it is. So I believe that we are not at that point yet, but we should begin to think about it. One of the things you see, some of the IMF reports, they've been consistently encouraging that we borrow money to give cash transfer. I have actually said a couple of times that I don't believe in that cash transfer, because I've never seen one Nigerian who will step up and say, thank you, government, I got meat. But I ask cash transfer, are you sure it is not right now, paying money for work not done? I said, why not sure? When you hear about, in 1965 or thereabout, President Lyndon Johnson made a trip through what they call the poverty belt of America. He documented among the hillbillies and, of course, a lot of the blacks in the South, how much poverty people were, and that was how they created the food bank thing. Yes, the food stamp.
What's it again?
Yes. Exactly. And of course, he was even only piggybacking on the work that John F. Kennedy had done. And why was John F. Kennedy taken out? Because he also had a mind of inclusion. So I said, so what they did in the US, and of course that has been rebranded to SNAP now. They call it SNAP now. They don't call it food stamp, but it's the same program. So what they give people is food. How can you tell us to be giving our people cash where we should be giving them food? So use that same money to capacitate our agricultural sector so that they can produce a whole lot more, okay? Produce a lot more so that our people can get those stamps. So those who are really down on their luck and go to the market, we can work that out, how it's going to work, how we're going to prevent fraud. We can work all of that out. But what I think we should do is that is food we should give our people, not cash. So we don't. I think that the mistake we may make is that I think we should understand that it's only we that we take ourselves out of the crisis and the problem that we are. Though I think that we still have a lot of time. We still have a bit of time on our hand. Let me not say a lot of time. We still have a bit of time on us Nigerians. We're only 66 years old as an independent nation. Sometimes I hear some of the superlatives we use to qualify ourselves. A country that finished. It's a country that hasn't actually started. It's not a country that's finished. So we've only just begun. If we would be a little bit calmer, we would achieve a lot. So essentially, so I think let me close on this. That so I actually agree with Mr. President. I very much support, and he had taken this decision before I joined government of removing fuel subsidy for several reasons. Number one, if we were talking of agri subsidy, and I think we have a few of those. We have a few of those, giving seedlings. I was reading somewhere, someone was saying that before, farmers used to keep their own seeds to replant their own seed, which is great. But recently, governments around the world now give farmers seedlings. And though the person segued and started talking about GMO and all of that, but even non-GMO seedlings are given by government to farmers these days. Maybe with a view to increasing output and all of that, and maybe sometime they want to ensure that you give seedlings that have much higher yields, which is not a bad thing, so there's subsidy in our agri sector right now. Whether we can do more, yes, we can do more. Okay, but the other oil subsidy, which started in 1974, we need to think about it. At some point under General Gowon's government, it felt, look, this money was too much. Dr. Clement Isong went to General Gowon and said, you know what, there's so much money right now, we don't even know what to do with it, which was a valid question if you ask me. We say, you know what, let's take a pause. What do we do? Do we invest this money long term, or do we just, blow it right now, or how do we plan it? It's a valid question, even though we use it to condemn General Gowon. He wasn't the one that said it. It was Clement Isong, the central bank governor, that said it. And of course, in those days, they invested a lot of the money in infrastructure. Many of the bridges around the country, the roads were done with those monies. But one thing they did was to say, look, this money is so much, which also coincided with the Udoji Award era. So, so why don't we just ensure that because we have crude oil, let's give it out for free. What we didn't consider then was that, look, we have crude oil, but we don't have the power to produce anything out of crude oil. Anybody that could, you could go and just Google it. The day oil was found in Nigeria, you will see a BBC article of 1956 in Oloibiri, and one man called Mr. Nengite, was interviewed about, what did they think about when oil was found. They said they knew that the Igbo man had a badge, it was not really deep sea, but maybe in the marshlands. And he had a badge, and all of a sudden, this black thing came out of the ground, and the Igbo man was very excited. And he called all the villagers, they give them Coke and Fanta, and everybody was happy. They say, the man says he's looking for oil. In their head, oil meant palm oil. And we have been doing palm oil business with Portugal since the 1400s. So my own thinking about crude oil is that, look, the person whose land it is hiding under the ground is not really the owner. The owner is the person that has the knowledge to extract it and to convert it into different products. That's the owner. There's the real owner. Till tomorrow in this country, only 35% of our total crude sale belongs to Nigeria beneficially. That is what the NAITI says, 35%. So when you hear that Nigeria has exported 1.5 million, whatever, just take 35% or maximum 40%. It's only recently that Mr. President is trying to claw back with the Executive Order 09 to ensure that some of the proceeds actually come. When they brought PIA, NNPC was sitting on 70% of all of the proceeds, and then they threw 30% back, and you're wondering what hit you. Since the time Mr. President did that policy to now, about at least 5 trillion extra has been collected from NNPC. So why would we in 1974 believe that we own a certain crude oil, so we should have the petrol for free? In a barrel of crude oil, which is 159 liters, the number of products that you can remove out of it may be up to 100 products, including petroleum jelly, including different kind of, even clothes, even clothing, even plastic, all the oils, all the motor oils in the world, apart from petrol. So we focus on that petrol. So let me land on that. So essentially speaking, to say that I personally believe that because of the frauds that we had seen in that sector, in 2012, Mr. Konjawala was here, and she documented in her book, okay, I forgot the title of the book now, on corruption, that 2.3 trillion naira was stolen, was what was stolen in the crude oil, imbroglio of that era. When these boys, will bring back ships to Apapa port and load it with water, or bring even ghost ships that have long been retired and collect millions of dollars in a PPRA and all of that, and everybody was smiling to the bank. Of course, when President Jonathan wanted to remove the whatever, then we protested. My own personal position then was I wanted to know exactly what the fraud that was going on in that era. So I don't blame President Tinubu for saying, you know what, let's walk away from this thing. Let's connect that singular sector. Like I said, agri sector, education is still subsidized in this country. All our schools are free, at least the public schools, except you know, and there are some public schools that are very okay. In fact, some of them, their WAEC result is better than most of the private schools in this country today. And they're all subsidized, and people pay absolutely nothing. So let's continue with education subsidy, health subsidy. To have a child, one day on my Facebook, I did that survey. To have a child in Kubwa Hospital, to have a child, normal birth, today, you spend less than 5,000 naira. In the US, if you have a normal birth, you don't have all their insurance and so on. A normal birth is $15,000. A child by CS is $60,000. In fact, the government of the day is presently sponsoring indigent people to have CS for free. So we still have all of those subsidies there, but we say, okay, you know what, this oil subsidy, let's move on. And I think that we're saving this country at least $15 billion every year by moving away from subsidy. So I'm in between. Let's take out oil subsidy. Let's retain education, health, agri subsidy, and let's even do more in those areas, especially the agri sector.
Thank you very much, Dr. Fatso. I want to go. So I want to apologize. We've taken more than the 40 minutes we promised, but I'm going to ask you just one more question that you used to wrap up. Don't you feel, because I actually somewhere else called it a kind of motor park economics, people who argue that unless if the subsidy for fuel, you're only subsidizing the rich people, they are the only ones who have cars and all this. Wouldn't it have been better, for example, to tackle the corruption in the fuel subsidy regime? Because if you have subsidy, and I'm saying 100%, you have a certain level of subsidy, both this subsidy for the health sector, you are talking direct subsidy to the health sector, you are indirectly subsidizing all sectors through what you subsidize in transportation, in food. In fact, transport costs is one of the reasons why food costs. Transport cost is one of the reasons why food costs go up. So when you have the transportation under arrangement, the fuel subsidy, if you had fought or managed to control the corruption in that sector, if you have managed, can you hear me?
Can you hear me?
Okay. If you manage to sanitize that section and reduce the corruption there to the barest minimum, and then maintain a level of subsidy, you are not only protecting our industries, you are virtually subsidizing all other subsectors or protecting all other subsectors. Teachers who go to teach will have better value for the money. Now I know the government people say, oh, the local government, they're having more money, 1.5 billion. What is the value? What is the basket of goods the 1.5 billion can get you now compared to what it was getting before? That's what we should be. That should be our a point of concern. I think, let me see, I think there are one or two questions. We can take questions from people in participating in WhatsApp, on Facebook. But Lord, just I think, okay, the person has dropped out. But so, don't you think it will have a much better all the other direct subsidies? You can get it just with one subsidy, fuel subsidy.
No,
a certain level.
Okay, well,
just like in the US, if you want to lose the election in the US today, tamper with the gasoline drastically, you are gonna. And the same thing in the UK.
You're right. But remember that we are not at the level of the US economy anyway. But I kind of disagree with you that we could have just maintained. I don't think we should maintain the oil subsidy at the risk of others. I don't even think that's your position. I'm not sure you will agree that we should remove education subsidy, health subsidy, agri subsidy, and retain oil subsidy. So I would say that's not your position.
I'm not saying you remove what you have now. One of the initiatives of the government that I am favorably disposed to, I mean, if it is sustained, because sustainability is an issue, is the one, and then the NEL fund, if it is sustained.
Yeah, if it
Uh,
is sustained.
it doesn't remove the fact that you need a level of subsidy. Let's say, for example, you employ people, you have staff working for you. Just that issue in Iran reduced their purchasing power by more than 30%. So many companies have to go, if you want to retain your core staff, you have to do emergency support. But if you have a level of fuel subsidy, it will also help to increase the purchasing power of the people. Even in the health sector, what's the point, for example, of giving direct subsidy to the education sector, which I support? Maybe I don't support, for example, that tertiary education should be subsidized at the expense of primary and secondary education, which is, much more crucial. I think it's an illogical way for me that university education is cheaper than even in some nursery schools. I find it a little confusing. But I'm trying to say you have, because it's an IMF thing, a World Bank thing, the whole mantra of removing the state, what they call rolling back the state, is remove subsidy, float the exchange rates. And this is part of the tendon, we call it the Washington consensus. So why are you asking us to remove subsidies? Yes, it should be removed in several ways. Completely remove it when you are subsidizing your own sectors. And what they do when you do this
Right.
is they do
Thank
dumping.
you. Let me have another attempt at the question. So my own position will be that yeah, you mentioned it's an IMF thing. Yes, indeed they've been pushing this. Like I said, partly, and I quoted Obasanjo as in that regard. So it's a case of sometimes a fine line that we have to walk. Sometimes you have to look at your own circumstance as a country and see what it is you can tinker with. So and I think that that midpoint is what we're able to find because of the corruption in that oil sector. That was too much. Yeah, you said we can actually begin to tackle it. Even if we have to line up people at the firing squad, but the incentive is too large. Okay, let me say some of the things that was happening in the fuel subsidy, in the oil fuel subsidy scam. So there are some people they would all sorts of shenanigans. Sometimes they would measure only seawater and say they have a full tanker. Sometimes they will bring the full tanker full of fuel. They will measure it. They will collect subsidy. They will move that same tanker to Cotonou and discharge, and it still enters into Nigeria. Sometimes they will bring half tanker, they will say it's full tanker. Sometimes they will bring decommissioned tanker, they will list them. You realize that the tanker doesn't exist, had been decommissioned since 20 years ago. How many of those do you want to chase? Okay, so fine. But you see, I think first of all, we have to tackle again, fundamental thing is this, that we don't have the capacity to produce the fuel ourselves. Okay, we can have crude oil in the ground, just like we have many other minerals. You can see that Nigeria is a lot wiser now. A couple of weeks back, Mr. President opened a couple of lithium factories in Nasarawa here, in Abuja, I think in Kaduna, and so on. Now, Nigeria, as well as other countries, are getting wise in Africa to say, you know what, we want to add value to what we have, as against just coming to pack crude from here and then bamboozle us. So we also we lived under that illusion that because we had crude, we needed to enjoy fuel for free. Whereas I also understand your idea behind if it's subsidized fuel, everything will be cheaper. Now that also goes into thinking about how inflation works in Nigeria. And I think I read an article a few weeks back about inflation, the peculiar behavior in Nigeria. A lot of what happens as inflation here happens on a whim. I mean, so okay, fuel price gets increased by 20%, for example, and people are increasing their goods by 50%. And if you're not lucky, panic sets in, and everybody begins to increase. Before you know it, prices have increased 100% across the board. It's because of the primitiveness of our economy, and we're only learning. And the more of this learning we put out there, the better for everybody. Because even in the United States, which is the bastion of capitalism, there are serious laws against price gouging and taking advantage of people. And I've been trying to tell Nigerians that Nigerians are the last bus stop. We ourselves will be the ones to challenge people when they're, you don't say because it's my good, if you like, take it. No. especially if you like it. Of course, FCCPC is now doing a much better job than used to be the case in tackling these things. In the US, every state, almost every state has a law, a serious, law against price gouging. During Hurricane Katrina, one guy from Kentucky bought some generating sets and took it to Louisiana, where they had a problem and they didn't have light. And he doubled the price. They arrested him and jailed him. It's there on the internet. Equally, during COVID-19, some Indian guys, two guys, were in the US, and then they were buying and hoarding face masks and other basic drugs with a view to they increase the price and were slamming people. They were arrested and jailed immediately. So who is Nigeria? You know, if these countries that have hundreds of years of experience in economics, and that's the thing you have also said, if it happened here, they will say, why are you tampering with the market forces? But they tamper with the market forces in the US. In Canada, yeah. Why did they say that they should not, at some point in time, they banned foreigners from buying properties in Canada because they said prices, especially Nigerians, they banned Nigerians and many other foreigners from buying properties in Canada. They interfered with the market. I have a long list of interference in markets in some of the so-called capitalist countries, who is Nigeria. So in my view, I think that, these subsidies, especially on fuel, I think we are taking a risk on it. 1974 to 2023, we had those subsidies in place. Where did it get us? So, and then of course, how connected it is. People take advantage of that fuel. Now, if the Iran-US war or US-Iran war to be put properly, because it's US that's aggressing them, if it had stopped by now, petrol would have gone down to 800 or 700 on the streets. In fact, crude oil could have fallen from wherever it is today to less than 40 or 30. Look at the volatility. And people make a mistake. Crude oil is not Nigeria's biggest earner. Crude oil is not Nigeria's biggest income. No. Crude oil is the biggest foreign exchange, but this economy is one of the most self-sustaining economies in Africa. In terms of internally what we can generate, even though we still have almost 60% of our economy is in the informal economy. Our economy is the second most informal economy in Africa, which is perhaps the second most informal in the world. So the more of the informal economy we're able to bring in, to say, okay, let's reckon with what's going on there. This country, the economy is perhaps bigger than we have reckoned with that it is. I was challenging many economists in Cote d'Ivoire last week. I said, you know what, we keep on pursuing foreign direct investment, but what is really driving our economies is domestic investment. Look around you, all the buildings you see around you, all these skyscrapers going on in Ikoyi and Kodia, they're from domestic investment built by local people. We should encourage them more and show more respect to domestic investors. And this is people who make money in Nigeria and reinvest the money in Nigeria, especially in the long term. All the industries we have, mostly of them are being run by Nigerians as we speak, So that's my position on that.
I think on that note, I really agree.
So let me land on this this is a multidimensional poverty thing. We always make a mistake. The multidimensional poverty talks about what they call non-income poverty.
If I still
it measures. Yes. Are you there?
It's okay. What for people? Yeah, people who steal money and take them abroad. The Dangotes and others that put their money back to the economy. That's why I think, in my own opinion, they remain the heroes of this country. So I would like to thank you very much, and I can see that this conversation we promised 40 minutes, and we have taken an hour and 9 minutes. Thank you very much, Dr. Faswa, for coming to our program. Thank you very much, and I know as a politician, you people are always jumping from one meeting to another. Thank you very much. Politics is an art of the possible. Those of you can, we clap for you people from the spectator side. Thank you very much. Yeah.
Well done, sir.
Thank you. Yeah.